Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to dive into something that's been on my mind recently. You've probably heard about Trump's latest comments where he talked about enemies within. Now, this isn't the first time we've heard language like this from him, but what does it actually mean? Could this be another example of Trump's authoritarian tendencies? Let's break it down. Throughout history, authoritarian leaders have often used rhetoric that targets supposed enemies within their own countries. This kind of language isn't just about labeling political opponents. It's about creating fear, suspicion, and division to consolidate power. So let's look at some historical examples of how this played out. Take Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union. Stalin would often refer to his critics or those he saw as a threat as enemies of the people. This allowed him to justify mass purges, imprisonments, and even executions of people who were just exercising their right to dissent. In a similar way, when Trump talks about enemies within, it could be seen as an attempt to delegitimize his critics, not just as political opponents, but as actual threats to the country. This can be dangerous because it creates a narrative that these enemies need to be dealt with, potentially leading to extreme measures. Then we have Adolf Hitler, who used this tactic to devastating effect in Nazi Germany. Hitler framed certain groups, Jews, communists, and political dissenters, as enemies of the German state. His use of this language unified his base by creating a common enemy, which made it easier to justify persecution and violence. Trump's enemies within language might not be at the same level, but it taps into that same idea, portraying certain groups like the media or political rivals as dangerous to the nation's well-being. This kind of rhetoric encourages division and fosters an us versus them mentality that's often central to authoritarianism. Take Vladimir Putin in Russia, for example. He's notorious for labeling opposition leaders and activists as traitors or agents of foreign powers. By portraying his critics as enemies, Putin is able to justify crackdowns on political dissent. Trump's use of the term enemies within follows a similar pattern. He's used it to dismiss officials in his own government and political rivals, suggesting they're part of a deep state conspiracy. This kind of language primes the public to accept more authoritarian actions, like undermining democratic institutions and silencing opposition. Then there's Erdogan in Turkey. After a failed coup in 2016, he labeled thousands of people as enemies of the state. This led to mass arrests, purges, and tighter control over the media. When Trump talks about enemies within, it raises the question, could he be laying the groundwork to justify similar measures against those he sees as threats to his power? Lastly, we can look at Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines. Duterte uses rhetoric that paints his opponents and even drug users as enemies, which has led to human rights abuses. While Trump isn't directly calling for violence in the same way, his language could encourage harsher tactics against political dissent or protest movements, just like we've seen in these other countries. So, what's the takeaway here? Throughout history, whenever leaders start using language like enemies within, it often leads to actions that erode democratic norms. It weakens the checks and balances that keep power in check. Trump's recent comments fit into this broader pattern we've seen from authoritarian leaders. And while we're not at the point of full-scale repression, it's worth asking, could this rhetoric be laying the groundwork for something more dangerous down the line? What do you think? Are these just words, or is there a deeper intention behind them? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives like this. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.